Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, as informal as we've ever been, just a regular t-shirt. It's kind of hot anyway. Hair's a bit of a mess. Mustache in full force. One of my friends likes to joke that, personal time with Greg really went downhill after Greg grew a mustache. I just can't take that guy seriously anymore. Anyway, I haven't done a personal time in a little while. I just gotta say, being away from YouTube, it just felt really good. It's been really refreshing to not be thinking about their system anymore. We've been doing the comics, and the comics are not like exploding, but they're growing an audience, and creatively it's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying it. I'm hoping it does well. It's tough to say yet, but there's potential there. The reason why I'm doing this personal time is because I recently watched a video by some guy called Quentin Reviews, and I was just so disappointed by his video. It was about the history of animation, or something is kind of how he phrased it, or how he advertised it. But he put it as like, oh, Fallen Titans, these animators, and then he kind of briefly went over 4 animators, and he talked about their most popular pieces. And then he looked at them and he goes, yeah, so the humor is dated, and that's why they're not cool anymore. And I believe this guy also did a review on Doug Walker, the Nostalgia Critic, and talked about, the Nostalgia Critic, he's not with the times anymore, but I, Quentin Reviews, am with the times. And same goes for these other modern YouTubers who are all doing well, and who are all climbing to the top. We're all a form of quality, and Nostalgia Critic is not. And it upset me because he kind of mischaracterizes what is frankly really just an era of online entertainment. Nostalgia Critic it was a format. Like, a lot of people were kind of doing that format. A lot of people really liked those videos. And animation, man, there's a whole lot that I could say about animation. So I wanted to do this video knowing that really, there's a core group of people who will see it, and YouTube is fiddling more and more with their systems. It's getting to where now they, I don't know if everyone actually keeps up with this. Well, I know not everybody keeps up with this news, but YouTube is changing it now to where your subscriber feed won't even show people. Like, it used to be that you didn't get notifications about YouTubers who were not preferred by the algorithm, but now your feed won't even correctly categorize YouTubers pretty soon here. There's like a pilot group that this is going on with right now, but in a few months, you're not even going to be able to see your people at all in the subscriber feed. So it's getting harder and harder to reach people. And point is, though, I just wanted to say it because even if a couple of hundred people hear what I have to say, that's still a couple of hundred people. And I'm saddened that these modern YouTube channels can get hundreds of thousands of views when what they're really just doing is every single week they come up with something that they can talk about offhand, and then they do a video, and it's just amazingly successful. Because this Quentin Reviews guy, like, what he talked about, it was stuff that you would expect someone to know if they grew up in that era and they remembered some things about it. But anyway, though, what I really actually wanted to talk about was back in the day. It's not that the humor really ever got dated. It's that it was kind of a different situation. Back in the early days of the internet, everyone kind of had their own personal web pages, and bandwidth was a bit of a struggle. You couldn't just upload anything to a web page. If you put a lot of images on your web page, nobody could load it. It would take ages, like a half hour, to load a bunch of images on one page. These days, that's inconceivable. The internet is so fast that, you can load up Yahoo, and it's just picture after picture after picture, even some video, and you'll be fine. You won't see any sluggishness at all, really, in your web browser. Or hopefully, depending on where you live, I suppose. But the internet is much faster than it used to be. And back in those times, when you wanted to use visual aids to do things, the only thing you could really get away with was a GIF. And not like a long GIF, but like one short GIF that loaded once, because that GIF was going to take up like most of the load time on your computer. And so for entertainment back then, we had webcomics. Webcomics were popular. There were lots of webcomics that people liked to go to. Everyone had their own web pages with webcomics. And then you had places like you'rethemannowdog.com, where you would upload a GIF and maybe get to put some music behind it. And all that would be on that page would just be that GIF and the music behind it. So people would use that format to sort of make jokes. And this is kind of one of the birthplaces of the meme, the idea of the meme. Because back in those times, because you had so little data to work with, you had to kind of get your message out there and tell your joke with as little information as possible. So it became popular to use shorthand from like popular television series or things like that everybody already knew. I've talked before about what memes are or what memes were before it became kind of a derogatory term. And for example, you'd have Captain Picard, and Captain Picard would do the facepalm. And in Star Trek, Captain Picard is depicted as this very patient guy. He's, very benevolent. He likes to negotiate through things. And if you post the facepalm on somebody, you're saying, like, you're being so frustrating that even Captain Picard would lose patience talking to you. So the Captain Picard meme was a package of information that said more than what was just there on its face. And anyone familiar with Star Trek, and of course a lot of people on the internet back then would have been, lots of nerds, everything like that, you would be sending them like a whole message and not just one picture. So you'rethemannowdog.com was kind of that joke, because a lot of people thought that Sean Connery shouting, "You're the man now, dog," in Finding Forrester was really funny. And so they made a GIF of that with the sound, and a whole website kind of sprang up underneath that. One of the more famous things from that was the LOL Internet GIF, which was just a picture of Ronald McDonald pointing off into the sky, and he was in his Ronald Mobile, and there's like this high-paced music behind him. And essentially that was kind of a mentality at the time, is a lot of people enjoyed the fact that you could share information with thousands of people. I mean, for the first time ever, without paying a license or advertising to be on TV or in the radio or whatever, you could just post an image and thousands of people would see it. And so, LOL Internet, like lots of people were just doing this. They were just posting these you'rethemannowdog.com things, and there wasn't really that much fame behind it. But people would just go through all these different things. They would rate them, 5 stars, whatever, and the really well-rated ones would get to the top, and everyone would have a laugh, And these websites, over time, they built up these communities, and the communities would kind of have these in-jokes. Like I say, it was very memey. You would get to post one GIF, so you would post that GIF, and it would contain information alluding to maybe another joke that was popular, and people would remember that other joke. And so, in this way, people on those websites were able to kind of build up more complex and more sophisticated jokes by sort of building off of things that people were already familiar with. And this worked well as long as you were familiar with the culture of that website, but it was never going to last forever, because as they expanded and as they grew, you were going to get people from the outside who weren't familiar with the culture, who were going to come in and be confused. They weren't going to get this complex series of jokes. They weren't going to understand where the humor was. And then there were some things that were posted to be funny like that, and then there were some things that were posted just to be weird, because again, previously it was impossible to reach so many thousands of people, and it was a chuckle for a lot of us to just share weird things with people. Now, this kind of comes to Newgrounds and Weeble and Bob, PyTunes. PyTunes and Weeble and Bob are the same thing. But anyway, the guy who made Badger Mushroom. During this thing, this reviewer guy, he looks at Badger Mushroom, and he plays it, and it's a weird animation. It's this loop, and I'll get to why that was a thing. But it's this loop, and it's just a song. It goes Badger Mushroom. Oh, it's a snake. Oh, it's a snake. And then it would loop, and it would go back on itself, and it would play again. Well, the entire joke with Badger Mushroom was that it was weird. It was kind of catchy. It was a song. It was like a little animation. But you would show it to people, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's really weird." And you'd be like, "Yeah, LOL Internet, I'm just so glad that I can share this stuff with people." And of course, the reason why, you'd just share these things with people, there was no money in it. There was nothing really. You weren't trying to rake in the largest demographic so that you could support yourself financially. You were just trying to get a chuckle out of people on the websites that were there, or the people that were watching. Badger Mushroom was incredibly popular and still well known today because it was weird. And because a lot of people kind of found it sort of catchy. There was a bunch of other stuff that Weeble did, such as, Come to Kenya, the Narwhal song, things like that. Come to Kenya was one of my friend's favorites, I know for sure. Come to Kenya, we've got lions. Burp, 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 burp. And, he was one of those really popular artists who actually wound up growing things up around him. Weeble got into a whole bunch of different things. He has a whole bunch of different series. Weeble and Bob is, of course, the one he's better known for. It's also his namesake, Weeble and Bob. It's just this series of sort of joke-based things. He's got these sort of like musical bass lines that go on in the back, and Weeble and Bob, these two characters, just have these comedic interactions. And that's kind of the whole thing of it. And he built a website around that, sold merchandise, kind of turned it into a business. Very entrepreneurial. Something that you can really respect. And it was the kind of thing that I really kind of wanted to do. Like in the long run, I wanted to be sort of like Weeble. Or one of these other guys who built up into a business, with this animation stuff. I always thought that was really neat. And anyway, he did other things. He did Parsley Boobs. He did Toast King on the Moon. Another series, Cat Face, is a lot of fun. And he's also involved with Savlonic. I'm not sure if he's the singer with the mustache. I'm pretty sure in that. But I'm not sure what exactly the deal is with Savlonic as far as like the licensing and who owns that and whatever. But he does, the music video for it. And if you haven't seen any of his recent stuff with Savlonic, Weeble has not been getting the attention that he deserves lately. Like, if you go and you look at his channel, it's not pulling in the views that he used to. But a lot of the stuff that he does is still pretty rad. Like, Savlonic is still pretty rad. I recommend going and checking out a song called Broken, I think is what it is. It's got this really awesome bass line. Like, he's got like a spoken voice thing. I think it's pretty great. So anyway, so Weeble, he's an artist with this whole body of work, and he's got all this stuff going on. And so if you look at just Badger Mushroom and say like, oh, that was Weeble's peak, and it's dated now. That joke is dated. No one does lol internet anymore. Everyone's used to internet. It's really kind of underselling everything that Weeble has done and the entire business that he's created. I mean, like, it's a studio with this massive portfolio. He did commercials for Fanta. Like, a lot of you probably aren't aware of this because this is one of the more obscure things he did, but like, I remember playing like a little Flash game that Weeble made to advertise for Fanta. It's like this evil guy riding a Fanta bottle. This like type of Flash game was going around all over the internet at the time. There's tons of stuff. If you wanted to talk about Weeble alone for a 15-minute rant, there would be so much to talk about. And, just so disappointed, so profoundly disappointed that this guy found this one little thing. So yes, the point is I was going to go back and I was going to explain, the whole animation thing. So the other thing that this reviewer brings up is like, Newgrounds had better quality than YouTube did at the time. And again, he kind of doesn't explain why that would be. He sort of cites it as a point of like, once YouTube got better quality, if YouTube was better. But you didn't see a lot of live action stuff back in those times because what everyone relied on was the Flash format. And Flash is not just a program. Flash, most of you are familiar with Flash in terms of like, Flash, the Flash animation suite, which they've changed to Adobe Animate. But Flash was actually a format, or the .swf or whatever. It was a very bandwidth-friendly format that could be used for banner ads, primarily is what Adobe said it was for. But people also repurposed it and they used it for animation. Because you wanted people, if you wanted people to load stuff up on a website, like I said, back at the time, an image would take forever to load. Well, as internet started to get a little bit faster, you could load slightly bigger things, but you couldn't really do something as large as like full-fledged video. You didn't get like HD video or anything like that. It was still too slow. You still couldn't download it. So instead, you got the Flash format. And Flash, anything made in Flash, was pretty quick to load, and in fact, you could build almost an entire website out of it. Those of you who are familiar with Homestar Runner will notice that the entire Homestar Runner website was built entirely on Flash. It was like a series of buttons, and you would go, and every time you'd mouse over a button, you'd get a little animation. Homestar would come up, tunes, email, stuff like that. They'd play a little thing. There were all these different pages that they played, and the whole website would be very robust and very quick to load. Newgrounds was based entirely in Flash. Everything that you uploaded to Newgrounds was Flash-based, and there were also a lot of like little websites that popped up that were, stick figure animations and things like that. People just making stuff in Flash and then putting it on their websites because they could. And of course back then too, the other thing that happened was it wasn't like you had to be good at an algorithm. One thing that was interesting was that if you had a domain name that was interesting, or that was catchy, you are very likely to get people to come to it. And in fact, for a long time, one of the most visited pages on the entire web was thebestpageintheuniverse.com, which, if you're familiar with, was owned by Maddox, who then got to be super popular through his blog of him just complaining about stuff, you know? He just had such an amazing domain. I mean, people used to pay a fortune for a good domain. Google has completely changed the landscape of the internet. Nothing is like it was, but back in those days, you know, you would just create something, you'd call it whatever, and if you uploaded, you know, your Flash animations to it, then people might see it. You know, they might just look it up if you had a good domain name. So, you know, it wasn't the best way to get noticed, but it could work out. There were all kinds of like fan pages and things like that. So yes, so Newgrounds had better quality video because everything was animations, not because it was possible to have better video, but just because that format worked and the live action format didn't work. It wasn't really until the advent of YouTube that people, once YouTube started to get once all the internet started to get better speed, YouTube was able to increase the bandwidth assigned to its videos, and they didn't like compress the YouTube videos quite so much, and so they came out looking better. Once they started doing that, people were able to start doing live action skits. And, you know, this meant that there was competition now as YouTube started to grow and develop an audience where animators were kind of in a field not with just themselves, where they had all kind of grown up and then it was interesting, but also with live action people. Actually, I should back up. I should talk a little bit about this other thing this Quentin guy talks about. Is he goes on about like, oh, there was this laser series. He really liked this meme series that went on. This I'm firing my laser beam, and the guy in that eventually he got tired of doing this firing my laser beam thing, and he kind of threw a fit at his fan base. And Quentin's like, oh, you know, that was bad and that was whatever. But back in those times, there was also no money in doing video unless you were selling merchandise and stuff like that. And the laser beam thing, it wasn't really I don't think it was something that they turned into a business, really. So there was no money in it. It was all just passion-driven. The guy just kind of liked, you know, the E-fame for a while. But as he went along, you know, maybe he got tired of the E-fame. People were bugging him to make more of these videos. And he got fed up with it. And so he burned the bridge. And, you know, like I say, it's very casual. Like, yeah, just burn that bridge, you know. Like, you almost can't fathom that happening now. Everyone's trying to get on YouTube. They're trying to succeed. They're trying to be... You know, they're trying to make money more than anything else, and it's unfathomable to think that you would just burn your, you know, like imagine that'd be like PewDiePie, just being like, you know what, I'm sick of this, and then he would just stop. But yeah, but there was no reward to going on if you weren't enjoying it anymore, so that happened to animators all the time back in the day. They would get sick of it, they would burn the bridge, and if they wanted to start over, they would make a new account with a new pseudonym, and they would just make different content. And they would upload that, and if people liked it, you know, 5 stars, and it might get on the front page. It'd start all over. So, you had a lot of different people that grew in that system. There was a lot of potential to get noticed if you did something interesting. There were problems, of course. The parodies, by far, did much better. People liked what they know. And the other issue was that you would go to the search bar, and you would type in the search bar things that you knew about, you know. So if you wanted to see, like, a Super Mario parody, well, there was probably more Super Mario parodies than anything else on Newgrounds, because people would often just go to the search bar and just type in Super Mario, and, you know, you'd bring up content. So, parodies and derivative content were just all over that website, and some people really resented that. They didn't like seeing so much popularity being assigned to things that people were already familiar with. That's difficult to combat. That's just human nature. And there was also a lot of kind of childishness on the website, especially as people started to drift away to YouTube. There was a bit of talent drain as people went for the money, and you got to see just more like dick jokes, more low effort kind of animations. And Newgrounds really struggled for a little while as they lost their niche, as it became that you didn't need to rely on Flash to make video anymore. They really needed to change, and in Tom Fulp's defense, I'm not entirely sure how I would have made things change at the time. Even in retrospect, it's hard to say what direction he would have had to go in. He was in kind of a tough spot because Newgrounds had always allowed just about any kind of content. They allowed pornography, among other things, which advertisers didn't want to touch. You know, it's kind of ironic now to think that advertisers were afraid of the nasty content on Newgrounds with all the stuff that's on YouTube today. But that was a big reason why Newgrounds was having a hard time attracting money and couldn't pay its animators, unfortunately. So, it was rosy for a little while. Animators switched over to be on YouTube, and in the early days, the sphere that you were competing in was mostly a creative one still. You got things like Chad Vader and other kinds of interesting things. I mean, for a while, there was this guy that I was watching called Thin Wall Challenge, where he would come up with all these clever little challenges to do while his neighbors were having sex, because they would do it really fast. It would be like a really quick 2-minute banging session, and so he would try to I don't know, he would try to boil an egg, and they never actually boiled an egg, but I'm just trying to think of all the little things he did. There was stuff with balloons. He got in trouble. They filed a noise complaint against him because he was throwing stuff against the walls while they were having sex, and his neighbors got mad. So, I don't know whatever became of that series, but just back then you had people doing interesting things, really interesting things. Everyone assumed that you would want to stand out on the basis of being entertaining. You were trying to do something different. You were trying to capture an audience by being unique and cool and everything like that. So animators still did okay for a little while. But then, of course, we have all the algorithmic changes that I often complain about and everything else like that. And nowadays, not very many people do animation at all anymore. You may have noticed, if you follow Cyanide and Happiness, that Cyanide and Happiness is now turning to Patreon to keep themselves afloat because YouTube ad revenue is falling out. They're still being promoted. Cyanide and Happiness is huge, not just on YouTube, but on in real space too. They've got games that they sell. Joking Hazard, I believe is what it's called. They've got a card game. It's kind of like Cards Against Humanity, but with one-liners. It's kind of fun. It's fun. I've played it at a party before and enjoyed it. They've got their animations. They've still got their comic. They got a lot of stuff going on. Cyanide and Happiness is a big deal. But a lot of animators have kind of dried up. Anyone who was hanging in there at a medium level, anyone who wasn't super massive, cratered out pretty much with all the changes. There's a guy, Sexual Lobster, who I've been following, and I'm really worried about him right now because I have loved his animations for ages. He's always just been bizarre, Quest of the Man-Whore, things like that. Oh, that's right, I was going to talk about the looping GIFs. So yeah, the GIFs. That was another thing that people used to do, is that you would, because you wanted to upload as small of a package as possible, it was really popular to do a song that looped, and that was part of how you got Badger Badger Mushroom, because the package you had to download was actually rather small, but because the whole thing was looping and had sort of a visually appealing element of the animation in the background, it was a great way to entertain people, because they would just let it run until they got tired of it, so they would get much more entertainment out of it than what you put in. Well, I mean, you would put hours of work into it, I guess. But point is, you had a 1-minute video maybe that people would watch for 5 or 10 minutes or something like that, because it was a catchy looping song. Weeble did that all the time, and it was just fantastically successful. It was a great format. So that's why you got that sort of thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Doug Walker, because in this era of when people were trying to be creative and interesting, vlogs were not really considered to be a thing that you could do and succeed with. It was sort of unfathomable at the time that something so mundane and boring and low effort would get off the ground. It's much different these days, but that was around when you got Doug Walker and his Nostalgia Critic, along with the Spoonie Experiment, Noah Antweiler. Linkara also got pretty big, and Angry Joe, who I didn't really like at the time, because what Angry Joe would do is he would do his takes, and he was really, really bad at doing everything in a single take, so he would just jump cut all his mistakes away. And I used to hate that he did that. I found it very jarring. I really disliked it, because in those days, it really wasn't done. You notice if you look at those Nostalgia Critic things, they would do editing and whatnot, but no one would do jump cuts except for Angry Joe, really. They would sit there and they would do the entire take, and if they screwed it up, they would reset and they would do it again. You got one continuous shot. They made sure that it was right. They didn't just spend a day doing their recording like you see on YouTube today. So I used to hate that Angry Joe did that. It's common practice now. Everyone does it now, but back then wasn't really something that was accepted. So Yes, Doug Walker and all those other guys, they were doing their reviews, and a lot of them were actually really funny. They were great speakers. They had pretty good voices. They maybe weren't at the peak of their skill level. That was something that they developed into as they went along. They were all very amateur. They weren't really like television network level, but they were kind of the type of thing that the internet would like to see. Guys who were independent and kind of making it on their own. A lot of them kind of were a little bit dickish. I mean, when you got into like who they were and the type of stuff they did, yeah, you could see like Doug Walker, when he quit his job to do Nostalgia Critic full time, he had this video of him going into work, and he played this song, and he had a shirt that said "I quit." I mean, he kind of just burned that bridge. It was sort of like, I think he flipped everyone off on the way out, so it was sort of like he didn't plan on needing a reference anytime in the future, anytime in the near future. I mean, enough time has passed that maybe it wouldn't matter anymore. But you can say what you will about his personality. A lot of people, as Channel Awesome has imploded, a lot of people have been talking about what a prick Doug Walker is, but I think that's kind of more beside the point. Some of his worst business mistakes were certainly a big deal. I didn't know that he didn't own the Nostalgia Critic property. That's interesting. Also very unfortunate for him. But what he did at that time is there were a lot of people who were kind of trying to emulate that style, who wanted to do those reviews like the Nostalgia Critic did, because it was still entertainment and it was still challenging, but it was easier to break into than something like animation or like comedy skits or whatever, where sometimes like there were a lot of people who were doing lots of really interesting special effects. They'd come out with these short videos, they would wait a couple of months, then come out with another one, and they were pretty great. Like I said, I mentioned Chad Vader. Chad Vader had props, they had like locations that they went to, they filmed inside this grocery store. It was a whole thing, and not everybody could break into that, but lots of people could kind of do the reviewer thing. The problem was just that, how did you make it interesting enough that you would be noticeable above all this other entertaining stuff that was on YouTube at the time? So as Channel Awesome went along, what they wound up doing is they moved over to blip.tv, which is a service that is now dead. They couldn't compete indefinitely. They didn't really pull over enough people. But they were a lot more lenient about their copyright rules. Back when Doug Walker was trying to take off, YouTube just had a complete stick up its ass about copyright. They were terrible. I'm not exaggerating. It can be kind of bad now, but they're not nearly as bad as they were. Back in those times, if they got on your case about copyright, you really just couldn't function on the site. There were fraudsters that would go around and they would just say they owned a video, and then YouTube would pay them. Like, they would just give those guys the ad revenue until you filed the dispute, and they would continue to pay those guys like until the dispute process was over. It was awful. It was a pain. Nowadays, they put it into escrow. If you dispute your claim, then they just hold on to the ad revenue and they pay whoever wins the dispute. So there's a lot less scam stuff going on. But I had trouble where they used to ask me to prove that I hadn't stolen my videos. And that was really weird, because it's like, what do you say to that? It's like, well, I made the video. It's like, well, prove you didn't steal it. And it's like, how do I prove a negative like that? What do I tell you? And I would get different recommendations. People would say like, well, send your like software license. And I'd be like, all right, Sony Vegas, this is the end user agreement. Sony Vegas. I'd like link them to the webpage. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. There was no telling whether or not they were gonna accept that stuff. They were just really bonkers with the copyright. So they moved over to Blip TV. A lot of other people did around that time. You also got Card Games for the World, the guy who did Little Karibo, the guy who did Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, Team 4-Star, who did Dragon Ball Z Abridged. They also went over to Blip. Same problem. YouTube would just constantly breathe down their neck and make it impossible to survive on that site. So a lot of those guys who relied on fair use and third-party material to make their living, they all went over to Blip to do their thing. And Blip kind of welcomed them in for a while. They were also the top guys of Blip. So if you ever went to Blip and you just looked up like a third-party property, you were going to find Nostalgia Critic at the top of it. If you were looking for Dragon Ball Z, you'd find Team 4-Star at the top of that, because those guys were the biggest people in there. So they were going strong, they were doing well, they were dominating that whole platform. then what they started to do is they started to look for other people because they didn't want to just put all their eggs into the basket of like, okay, so here's these 4 guys who are doing well. They tried to find other people. So what they did, though, is they tried to find people who jived with their particular style of doing things. So they looked for other people who were critics in the same format, essentially. So they had these critics that would come in and they would try to do crossovers with them. And they say, check out this guy, check out that girl, check out these people. And the problem is that a lot of times they were just pulling other people who were also amateurs and who didn't have the same audience or the same pull. And as the main guys continued to do their thing, they were getting better and better and more experienced, and so they just had better flow, they were more comfortable in front of the camera, and then you'd pull in some guy like, for example, Film Brain. And I remember once Film Brain showed up to do a crossover with Noah Antweiler, back before Noah Antweiler started developing all kinds of medical problems. And this guy, Film Brain, he just had this weird inflection to his voice. And he would be like, oh, hello, this is how I feel about this problem. And people hated it. Like, Spoonie's fans just tore this guy apart. They were like, I never want to see this guy again. And I don't know if the guy had like an actual speaking problem, or if that was like a quirk he was trying to develop for his character, or what it was that was going on. But it was awkward and it was weird, and people didn't really... There were a lot of people who didn't like it. Some people did like it, but I was among the ones that kind of really didn't want to see a lot of Film Brain. So they sort of wound up not being able to build up other people. They were able to get audiences to other people, but if they if they just kind of weren't there, it was hard to pull them up, and they never really got anything else off the ground. And it's kind of no wonder in hindsight, because if you think about it, they were really just trying to create replacements for the Nostalgia Critic in a way, which is a little bit odd. All these other reviewers were sort of competing to review things, and it's sort of like, well, Channel Awesome should have broken into other forms of entertainment rather than trying to do the crossover stuff. They should have just been like, hey, if you like our content, like, go check out this animation or whatever, go check out this thing, or, look at these other people. And if they diversified, they might have been a little bit better off. Might have been, I say, because eventually what happened was Blip.tv folded up. And once Blip TV folded up, all these other big channels had to go somewhere else. And they had to either be in a situation where they were with a network that had them as managed status, so that they wouldn't be caught in Content ID. This was the thing that had developed by then, was you could join a big network and the network could say, like, don't touch this person with Content ID, and they'd be fine. Or you had to change your format to where you weren't using the third-party material anymore. So I believe that Team 4-Star by that time, they were so huge that they were able to get a network that has been protecting their content, and I don't think that they have to dispute all the time like they used to. Same goes for like Little Karibo and whatnot. I don't know about Channel Awesome. Maybe they have. I hear that networks are changing and now they're losing that ability as well, which means that those old everything that used that old third-party content is about to go belly up. But as soon as Nostalgia Critic came back to YouTube, I knew that they were going to go under. Because the problem is that they'd survived on Blip with their own website for a very long time. And back when they first got started, that was a very normal thing to do. You would make your own website, and then you put a forum on your website, and people would go to that community, and they would talk to each other. And having that community to go back to would cause them to continue to visit the website. There was a point to it. There was a reason. And, it was good. But these days, everything is kind of curated by Google and Facebook and these other big platforms, and nobody really goes to these, individual websites so much anymore. Like, if you want to go see your content, like, all of the Nostalgia Critic's content is on YouTube. Like, why would you go to his website? You just go to YouTube. That's what YouTube wants. That's business-wise, that's what they're gunning for. They kind of wanted to kill all their competitor websites anywhere that people went to get entertainment, going off platform. They just don't like that. So the website died, and the other thing that happened to him was Doug Walker would take time to do his reviews, And you can say what you will about his acting ability or his writing ability. I mean, like, he tried to do that movie and it sort of flopped, but at least he tried, He was trying to do something interesting. He was still working in that mentality of, like, if I'm interesting, it'll draw people in. It's unfortunate that didn't work out, but things have changed. Now what happens is he puts all that time into making his Nostalgia Critic review. He'll spend a while working on it, and if it's not done within a week and it's not like 15 minutes long as YouTube prefers, then he's deprecated in the algorithm and he doesn't get as good of promotion. So I knew compared to somebody like Quentin Reviews, who spurned this entire personal time, that Nostalgia Critic was never going to be able to compete. Now when people look up some third-party property, they get thousands of other people who knows Nostalgia Critic might be like 3rd page, 4th page, 5th page. You never know where he's going to show up, but not on the front page. He's not updating fast enough. He's not releasing enough vomit onto the website, and YouTube just doesn't really want him. So as things started to come apart, everybody started ripping into him. I mean, like, everyone kind of knew that he could be a bit of a dick, but it wasn't until he started to fail that people really started to come down on him for it, because at that point he was vulnerable, you know. He wasn't really like the cool thing anymore. He's on the way down. So, you know, what can I say? The mistakes were made, and not every product you release is a hit, but I feel like it's vastly inappropriate to say that something like Nostalgia Critic failed because of something that they did necessarily. It wasn't just them. I mean, they made mistakes and they did things wrong, but the web has changed. The internet has changed. And like, Weeble is still great. Like, a lot of stuff that he does is still pretty cool. Like, I still kind of like checking his channel out and just seeing what he's up to. Like, there's not anything wrong with Weeble, but just like, animation doesn't do well anymore. Everything has changed, you know. Nowadays, you're really kind of looking at like who's dominating, and it's people like Quentin's Reviews, you know. He posts a video once a week, you know, 200,000 views, 300,000 views, you know. He's taking a big dump on Channel Awesome, 700,000 views. It's controversial. And a lot of YouTubers are like this now. A lot of YouTube channels, they're just talking about whatever's hot. It's not like a carefully choreographed sort of thing. They do it all in one take, and then they just jump cut out all the mistakes. You know, it's not really demonstrating a lot of skill. It's not really demonstrating a lot of knowledge. And they really can't be blamed because they need to make a video every single week. Like, you know, if you sat down and you wrote out a script for a 15-minute video, I mean, that's 15 pages of script, my lord. And then you have to do it all correctly. Like, you've got to take, and then you've got to retake, and then you've got to do your editing. It would be so much work. People would kill themselves trying to keep up with that work pace. So, Quentin Reviews is really all we can expect from YouTube anymore. And, you know, I don't know. I just feel like it's underselling an era to say that, like, well, the jokes got dated. The jokes didn't get dated. It's just things changed. And in my opinion, it changed for the worst. But you know, I don't know. I don't know. Don't know where everything's headed anymore as far as, like, media goes. But that's what I wanted to share. I wanted to put my perspective on those particular things out there. I know that I'm going to get like maybe between 600 to 1,000 views. I haven't posted a video in a long time. You know, I don't like the YouTube game. I don't like what YouTube's become. I wanted to do like real entertainment. I wanted to do things like, I'm an amateur, but I wanted to do my best. I didn't want to become what YouTube has become. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, anyway, though, as far as stuff going on with me, though, like I said, I'm getting better at art. A baby's coming. We got a son on the way. I have a son on the way. We've got the crib installed and everything now. Really soon. I'm really dreading the sleepless nights. Every time I mention it, I'm like, yeah, I'm really worried about the not sleeping thing. Every time I tell that to someone who's had a baby, they're like, oh, those are real. Like, those are absolutely real. Yeah, you won't sleep for like a month. And I'm so afraid of that. But they say that after that, it's over before you know it, because you'll be so sleep deprived, you'll barely be able to tell what time it is. So, you know, you'll lose your perception of time. You'll start to hallucinate that there's a dragon on the ceiling. And then the baby will just sleep through the whole night. And it'll be over. It'll be over. The time of suffering will be done. So, yeah. World keeps on spinning, life keeps on moving. So, yeah, I suppose that's it. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll catch you all next time.